heterosexual married sibling couples, right? And there's been very little research about this, but the role of ex-lovers in our communities. When I talk about ex-lovers, I actually ask the audience, who in the audience is an ex-lover, and a lot of hands go up. So let me talk specifically about lesbians. I think what's very important in lesbian communities is this pretty recent history of the women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s, where the focus was on sisterhood, investing your energy in other women. So women's land collectives, women's only spaces, separatism, there was this, this embracing of women's energy. And in 1975, Elizabeth Barnhart wrote an article. You could sort of tell she knew very little about lesbians. She was an anthropology grad student, and she kind of was focusing on them as if they were this exotic species. And she had this quote, "Among women advocating the beliefs and values of the counterculture, there's a small minority who in addition share a commitment to a lesbian sexual orientation. In Portland, Oregon, some of these countercultural lesbian women have formed groups which band together and call themselves the community." And I find even today there's this thread of nostalgia for those times, which in hindsight we see as so idyllic. We wish we could be back in this women's liberation movement, especially older lesbians, meaning lesbians my age or older, who were at least 18 in the 60s or 70s, who somehow see these communities, those communities as more feminist or more together or whatever. And of course there's also aspects of lesbian communities I think are unique to lesbians, not so much to other groups. For example, this focus of participating in and watching women's sports, either being, doing a sport or being a fan, attending women's music festivals and concert. Here's Dee's Radical Harmonies video, Dee's here today. And what you see disappearing, of course, are women's bookstores, lesbian newsletters, lesbian land collectives. Here's a very old picture of Carol C.J., who's here, an old wives' tale, over here. In Susan Krieger's book, The Mirror Dance, she had a quote, again, from one of her chapters, one of the themes, and I really love this, where the woman says she got the feeling that there were certain rules in this community, like you should be a vegetarian and not like red meat or pork, and prefer shopping at the natural food store. These were people who preferred whole wheat bread, wore earth shoes, drove small cars, and didn't use paper products. They believed mostly in triangles, like fidelity in a relationship was almost a negative value. Also, you couldn't shave your legs. It was an anti-cigarette culture. You had to go canoeing. You had to know about the moon. We just a lot of this. But what Susan Krieger is saying was going on when she wrote up the results of this study is there was kind of this paradox or this conflict. So on the one hand, if you joined the community, it promised support, it promised inclusion. You were part of them. On the other hand, there was this pressure, as you can see, to look a certain way, to eat certain things, to do certain things, and women felt that their own individuality would be disappearing. So to some degree, of course, that's true in any community, but this was really a theme in the lesbian communities, the pressure to be, look, and do certain things. And more recently, a graduate student in San Diego did a needs assessment that was unpublished of the LGBT Center in San Diego, and they wanted to know how they could get more women to join. And she did focus groups. She surveyed over 300 women, most of whom were lesbians. She had half her sample were single, about half were parents, and 38% were women of color. And what she concluded was that the women wanted to belong to the community, but they also felt that the community was rejecting, cliquish, or fragmented. She said reactions ranged from disappointment and sadness to anger and powerlessness. The women felt invisible and neglected. They also perceived gay men to have more community. And I should say there's never been a study comparing lesbian to gay male community. So here are some of the results of our research on lesbians and their heterosexual sisters. These are significantly different demographic issues. Lesbians are more highly educated and attended colleges that were further from home. They live further from their parents right now. They perceive less support from their family of origin and have less contact with their family. They're less religious and more politically liberal. They're less likely to have children, and they're in partner relationships of shorter duration than heterosexual sisters. That's a lot of differences. And also, when we asked them why they moved to their current location, lesbians said they were more likely to move for their own education, whereas heterosexual sisters were more likely to move because of their husbands' jobs or their children's education. So you can see here a big difference. Heterosexual sisters are staying closer to home. They're more tied to religion, to their families. That's where they're getting their support. Very different from lesbians who are moving away, who are feeling disconnected, who are less religious. And so obviously community is going to be very important. And actually the reason I study siblings is because siblings are so similar in terms of ethnicity and race most of the time, usually very close in age. And if they are close in age, have very similar family backgrounds, parental income, education, religion, etc. So they really are a good comparison group in many ways. Now in terms of gay male communities, our research found that gay men were also different from heterosexual men. They were more educated. Gay men were less likely to be in a current partner relationship. They were less likely to have children. They were more likely to live in big cities, which many other researchers have found as well. If you want to survey gay men, big cities is really where gay men are found. Less religious, less contact with family of origin, and they perceived more social support from friends. So gay men, too, you can see this movement away from rural areas, smaller cities, into bigger cities, less religious, etc. Other research on gay male communities. This study at the top found that even for gay men who were parenting children, their biggest source of support were their friends, not their families. That's very different from heterosexuals who are parenting children, who almost always mention their families. Woolwine, remember he was the guy who talked about imagined community. He found evidence of these symbolic communities. For example, gay men strongly identifying with gay organizations at the national level, even though they may not know a lot of people. That's kind of their community. And a study more recently that asked gay men about their perceptions of the gay community found that 2/3 of the men indicated that the greatest advantage of the gay community was social, for example, meeting sex partners, lovers, and friends, followed by increased self-understanding and activism for some. And this is somewhat different, as you can see, from lesbian communities, where you don't get this big focus on social events. There's more this sort of feeling about lack of support, actually. So some unique aspects of gay male communities. I think many people have written about the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic was a time of many gay male communities organizing, really connecting in a way they may not have previously. The focus on non-monogamy, a number of studies have looked at this. In our civil union study, over 40% of gay men in couples, those in civil unions and those not in civil unions, had an agreement that sex outside their relationship was permissible in some circumstances, which is very different from lesbian and heterosexual couples. They might be having secret affairs, but they don't have an agreement about this. So it's possible that gay men's greater presence in large urban centers, combined with the gay male community's greater focus on and acceptance of social and sexual activities, may make it easier for gay men to find community than for lesbians. I'll be curious to hear afterwards what people think about this. In terms of bisexual women and men, I first want to talk about women and men together because there's very little research on bisexuality, and people who are bisexual don't typically like the word bisexual, which makes it hard to research them, and in fact they don't like labels, period. They don't like categories. And you know, for social science researchers, if people don't like categories, you really have a hard time knowing who to include. So also, most studies, including ours, find more bisexual women, more women who identify as bisexual than men who identify as bisexual in sort of large surveys. And again, I see this in many studies. So it could be that bisexual men may be more accurately categorized as men who have sex with men but actually identify as heterosexual, for example. And in fact, in the African American community, the term down low, or DL, is used for men who have sex with men and may not tell their female spouse, partner about it. More recently, Pascalupo edited a book where she has kind